Hello everyone, welcome. In this video, let's talk about how to deal with this approach after the corner enclosure. So it seems pretty normal, right? This is the equivalent of white playing the approach first. Black answers and then white takes cente, right? So now it's black's turn on this corner. But we are actually going to see some patterns that we haven't seen before. So it's actually pretty exciting and pretty interesting, right? So this move, first of all, is totally legitimate. It is a good move for white to play. However, is it a good move for beginners and cue players to play? That is really for you to decide. So generally speaking, there are a few responses to consider. One is this kick, right? It touches this stone, it's putting maximum pressure on this stone. And then you can consider some of the pincers. We'll talk about the low one-space pincer at B and the low two-space pincer at C. But before we get into these, one thing to note is that even if and even when black has an extra stone here on the side, this move, this approach still exists. This still exists. And of course, in this situation, black's best response is to kick, right? It doesn't make sense for you to play another pincer here. This is already a three-space pincer. It's already not allowing white to extend on the side, right? So even in this situation, number one still exists. You can understand this as a kind of invasion, right? You're just invading the side and trying to establish a group. But of course, it's not that easy, right, for you to view the base. It's very hard to view the base, actually, when there's already a stone, black stone on the side, right? But you can escape toward the center, right? So that's the whole idea, right? You can escape toward the center. There are certain moves that you can try, right? So you're not going to get surrounded immediately, number 1 and 3, and that is why this move exists. And AI actually recommends it for the purpose of invading, right? This black territory, not yet territory, but influence right here on the upper left. And the good thing about playing the kick is that for white, is that all the liabilities in the corner that comes with this pattern, which I talked about when I introduced the kick Joseki earlier in this chapter, chapter 5 here on this channel. You can check out some of those videos if you're not familiar or if you've already forgotten the implications here in the corner, right? I introduced both the small nice move and the one space jump move, right? And the subsequent follow-ups. So all of those still apply, right? So that's good news for white in a way, but does black really need to worry about the corner being taken? Once again, the answer is no, right? If white comes into the corner, then black is very happy to give white the corner territory. And as the variations we saw earlier in those videos where I talked about this potential invasion, black can allow white to live, but white will live at the expense of weakening these two stones on the outside. So all these liabilities for black on the corner will only materialize when white actually escapes, right, toward the center, right? Only after white is safe do these liabilities become actual liabilities for black, black's weaknesses. Otherwise, black is not afraid of trading the corner territory for influence on the outside, which will weaken the white group, right? So white will have to get strong first on the outside, which will take some effort. And then if black's corner is still open like this, then there will be weakness. But of course, it's very easy to fix it, right? You can play some of these moves and strengthen the corner very easily. So black doesn't need to worry that much about its own weakness that comes with a kick shape, right? Once again, number 1 can be seen as a kind of invasion, right? After 1 and 3, then black most likely will play a pincer. The exact spot of the pincer, I think depends. I think all of these exist like high and low 3-space and 2-space pincers. Um, what about the 1-space pincer? This also exists. I would say the low 1-space pincer. This will be a little weird because your opponent can get underneath this stone very easily. So maybe not. Maybe just this, this, this. These 5 choices, right? Really depending on what's going on the upper side, right? If you pincer too close, then the danger, of course, is that your opponent can counter pincer, and then number 4 is more isolated. So you only do this when black is already pretty strong on the upper side. If you're not that strong yet, then you should stay farther away from these white stones. So that's black. And I believe I probably mentioned why white should play this move, right? One is to make sure that there are certain weaknesses in black's corner that white can exploit later. And also, if you take Sente in this situation, then black can either press number 1 down like this or secure the entire corner with number 4. And number 1 is really kind of a wasted stone here, right? It'll be very difficult for white to play anything on the corner after black adds a move. So that is why it's very, very important for white to answer this way. So that's the kick, right? You need to understand why black is not afraid of the liabilities, because white will need to get stronger first on the outside. Otherwise, taking the corner will only weaken the outside, which is not worth it for white. That is why this is the best for black, right? If you're a beginner Q player, you might be thinking some of these other moves, right, that protects the corner. But as we mentioned before in the past couple of videos, these moves do not put nearly enough pressure on number 1, right? Number 1 can play an extension on the upper side very comfortably, and that is not what black wants in this situation, right? You want to put pressure, so white owes a move here, and then you play the pincer, right? White cannot extend, otherwise black can play this move, and the whole corner is already black, so almost 20 points, very, very solid and very big. And white's shape still has problems here. So that's the kick. What about the pincers? So let's look at the 1-space pincer first. So the 2 pincers will be similar, but some of these variations will also be similar, but the 1-space difference still makes a difference in some of these variations. So let's look at this. So what would you do as white in this situation? Your opponent is pincering. Of course, you're thinking about the corner. But the correct move is not the 3-3 point. This is not the correct move. But it is what a lot of players are taught these days. Right, so white can take the corner this way, right, by threatening to connect with number 1, but 6 and 8 kind of denies white that choice. And I think number 8 can be here, should be okay, or number 8 can connect here. Either should be fine, and now black can press white down like this. In this situation, there are just too many cutting points. Maybe just connect, block this way, right? There's a cutting point on the outside, but white owes a move on the inside, right? White, of course, can cut here first. And what happens is that, again, white owes a move on the inside. And if white totally ignores it, then black can kill white this way. This is not enough eye space. So black can play this first, maybe play on the outside, make sure both sides are fine, and then white owes a move here. Right, so this is how it will develop. And this is good for black, because black is pretty solid on the outside, and even when white cuts, these two groups are pretty easy to settle. And this white group on the outside doesn't have a base. Right, so that is why number 3 is not recommended. I know it is taught and it is learned by a lot of beginners and Q players, but this is no longer the Joseki. This is no longer the Joseki. Of course, in this situation, black is not going to allow you to live this way, right? Now, number 2 seems a little silly, Right? White is already alive on the corner. Right? This is already a living shape. Enough ice space. This will be a straight 4. Right? Living shape. And number 2 is not doing much. So black will definitely try to cut off number 1 here. And the corner is simply too small, and the wall is too strong on the outside. So that is one thing to keep in mind. This is not the optimal move. What is the optimal move? Is it jumping out? Also, no, right? Not many people cover this, but also just remember this is not the optimal move, but it's better, I think, than taking the 3-3 point and allowing black to have such a strong wall on the outside. At least this is escaping, but black can deny white easy entry to the corner by playing, once again, this kick. And since white already has the stone here, you do not play this connection. That'll be too slow. You stand down here, right? Still threatening to come into the corner or jump into the corner as endgame moves. Only as endgame moves, right? You have to save those for later. You cannot weaken this white group on the outside. So this is how white can proceed, but you do not build a base, right? And you cannot come in the corner easily without weakening the outside. Or of course, there are other moves that AI might suggest, right? Moves like this, maybe moves like this. But the idea is similar, right? So white does not get a base on the side or the corner, but white does to get to jump out, right? So usually the optimal move is this attachment underneath, which is, again, very similar to what we learned before, earlier in this chapter. But there are differences. One difference is that black actually doesn't want to play this. In this situation, when black already has a pincer stone at number 2, white will just take the corner instead of trying to connect out. And white will still be under attack, right? This is not fully alive yet. So without number 2, we say white does not want to get enclosed and want to get out. But with this black stone on the outside, white will actually just, take the corner territory, and black's wall is not that strong, right? Because of this shape. If black plays elsewhere, then white can still play on the left side very easily because there is a weakness in black's shape. Right? So the wall is not that strong, and white is actually happy to just take the corner territory in this situation. So black does not want to give white the choice, right, of connecting out or taking the corner, right, because taking the corner is not great for black. So black can instead play this extension. Right? Now white cannot capture number 4. Right? So white can only connect here, and black, right, presses on here on the 4th line. And white's capture? No, not really. This will be 3 liberties versus 3, and white will be dead. Right? It'll be something like this. So white does not have this cut. So black saved this stone and actually presses white down. And this is a pretty good result, I would say, for black. Very solid on the outside. And number 2 is on the right spot. So what should white do in this situation? White should probably Atari this way to gain more eye space here in the corner. And now white can either take Sente, right? But black's follow-up, this is forcing. And if white doesn't answer, then black can cut here, something like this, and the corner will all die. Right? So white will owe a move, right? White owes a move here, the corner is alive, the wall is really solid, right? The wall here is really solid. So if white doesn't want to see a solid wall, then white can bump again and play this Hane on the 2nd line, and black can choose to answer or not, depending on how empty the board is, depending on whether there are other urgent moves on the board. But of course, black can also keep playing on the 3rd line. So once again, very strong wall on the outside for black. So that's what happens when white plays the attachment underneath, right? Black can get a pretty solid wall on the outside. So white may not be happy with that result. And there's another move. And that is right here. This is a move that I haven't really talked about. I do think it exists even without number 2, but it's very rare when white is not at a disadvantage like this. There's 3-on-1, you play this move. If it's just an approach, black answers, this move still exists without number 2, but it's very rare. But it's worth looking into this, right? What is this trying to accomplish? What it's hoping to do is that black will answer this way. White plays the clamping move, right? And black saves the corner. And this is a good shape for white, and not a great shape for black, because black is pressed down to the 3rd line, right? All of these stones, and they're all connected, not super efficient. But white actually has a pretty good shape. Right? In this situation, white can actually even counter pincer here to put some pressure on number 2. And it's very easy for white to get out, play toward the center. One thing to note, of course, is that number 5, right? You might be worried about this Atari. It's actually not that important at all. This is no longer important, right? This is actually very small. You do not need to worry about number 5, number 3. The shape with number 1 and number 7 is actually really great, right? And number 2 is now the weaker stone here. So this is what white is hoping to accomplish. Really good shape, presses black down, separates number 2, and white can get out. Of course, white reserves the option to build at least one real eye here on the side. So this is very good for white. But of course, black can counterattack. And the first option is right here. And now white will have to take the corner territory. But there's a push and cut. Right? So which way should black cut? Black should cut on the outside. And if white takes it, black will capture the corner. But this is sente, right? Black cannot play this, otherwise the corner will be dead for black. So black needs another move here, and white can get out. So this is playable for both sides. And if black cuts on the inside, then the corner is pretty comfortable. And the outside shape, I think, should be okay. It's okay for black, but it's not the best, right? White can still cut here, try to harass black. There's still 2 white stones on the outside. They're not completely dead. So this is how black can kind of counterattack here. And white is worse off connecting here, right? This is just another variation. And this is probably an even stronger wall, I would say, for black, right? So probably this is not great for white. White should take the corner in this situation. Yeah, but this is number 4, right? 3 and 5. 5 is the good move that you should learn. But number 4 will have other options. What about this? This is not good, because number 3, the goal of number 3 is to threaten to cut off this stone right here. Right? So if it's like this, then black still needs a move, right, to kill number 1 here, and white will get to develop on the left side. So that's actually not bad for white. And this usually is slightly better for white, because white does get to cut off this stone. And number 1 is not, still has life, right? If you put a stone here, still has life, right? Something like this. So that's number 4 here, not great. What about this, right? This is another move. It's kind of trying to do both. It's not allowing white to connect very easily, and it's connecting, right? There's no push and cut. And in this situation, the optimal move for white is actually right here, right? But this seems a little hard to pull off. Of course, black is going to cut, and white cannot just give up this stone that easily, right? Because now black is building on the left side on the 5th line here. That's really big. So white will have to try to save this stone, and this is again threatening to cut off this stone. and black probably doesn't want it. So black connects here, and white Ataris. Black escapes and Atari, and white escapes. So this will be a fight. This is actually a fight. Pretty complicated. But this is um, how both sides can proceed after number 4. Right? But of course, if you're if you're white in this situation and you do not want to fight, then you can just jump out. Right? This is more peaceful, and number 3 and 4 benefits white, I think. Right? If black cuts off white this way, then this is very slow. Right? This is very slow. So white is not afraid of this shape. But compare this to this. Right? Getting cut off like this is more efficient for black, stronger for black. So that's number 4. And the most interesting is right here. Right? This Hane, very harsh. This is saying there's no way number 1 and number 3 can connect. So black is really just cutting off white. Right? And this is what white should be afraid of. But white has this clamp again. And it's not great for black to give up the corner, right? This way you don't even have the push and cut anymore, right? This is not going to work for black. So black must protect the corner. But now black has 2 cutting points. And white should cut this way, right? Cutting here doesn't work. Number 3 is still cut off. So white needs to cut this way, Atari, black must connect. And now white needs to calculate which way to play the Atari. If you play this way, then white will die. Right? White will die this way. And this actually, right, white just cannot escape. It's all going to die here. Right, so number 9 is the wrong direction. You have to calculate. Number 9 here is correct. Right? Black must extend. And what happens now is that white can connect here. Again, it's threatening to break out. This will be pretty good for white. So black will want to enclose white in this situation. And white can capture these 2 black stones by blocking on the inside. But if you block on the outside, once again, black will just live on the corner, and these 3 white stones on the upper side will be killed. So that's how this works. If you connect here, then of course black can play this Hane on the first line. This will be 3 liberties versus 2, and white will be all dead once again. So white must block from the inside. Now, if black plays here, then this is 3 liberties versus 4, right? Black is going to lose. So what black should do is to play on the outside, right? Atari forcing, and play 2 Atari moves. And this is actually slightly better for white, right? Because of this cutting point. Black still owes a move on the outside, and white gets sente. The corner is pretty strong, right? Almost 10 points, depending on whether white captures this black stone in the end, and white gets sente. So this is slightly better for white, actually. Right? So all of these are viable variations for both sides, unless I explicitly noted that it's not okay for one side to play. So that is the 1-space pincer. And the 2-space pincer, there are differences, right? If you consult AI, there are differences that are worth noting. Even some tutorials, I think earlier in the AI age, do not differentiate between the 1-space pincer and the 2-space pincer that much, right? They're still thinking this exists. Of course this exists, but AI actually likes this better for white when there's one more space, right? AI actually thinks this is better for white for some reason, right? And black's wall is even stronger, you can say, but AI actually likes this better for white. Just a conclusion. I do not know exactly why, right? But there are differences between the 1-space and the 2-space pincers. So in this situation, AI actually recommends black playing right here or here. Right? If you play here, then white can trigger this code, right? Can trigger the code, or even if not, this still works for both sides, I think. Right? Something like this. Right? White still gets out, black takes the corner. Or if it's something like this, then of course white again can settle, right? So number 2 is not putting that much pressure on this whole group compared to the one space pincer. Right, so that's the recommendation. Does this work? Right, this is slightly better for black compared with a one space pincer, right? Because two space is always better than one space when you're building a wall on the outside, because two space is more efficient. So maybe white will want to save number 1, right? Gives white an extra choice. Because number 2 is a little farther apart, it's slightly less pressure on this white group. So white might want to try to get out this way with number 11. I think it's a viable move. Or of course, white can play more slowly and play something like this, right, to stay alive. But black can cap white this way. Right? You can play the Atari. So this is not very fun for white. It's all on the second line. But white does have choices. White does have more reason to connect out because it's a two space pincer. So it's all very subtle. Right? I'm trying to show you these variations just to showcase that the thinking might be different, right? Just because of where number 2 is. And you shouldn't right, remember, like, this variation is always good for black. That's not true, right? That is simply not true. It's all very subtle, right? These are the things, of course, that you can remember, but sometimes comes with a little experience, and of course it comes with calculation in games. So that's the attachment underneath, right? Similarly, of course, this will be even worse because, once again, black will get a wall on the outside, and number 2 is at an even better spot. So this is not okay. Not okay for white. And jumping out will be very similar. And you have this move or this move, right? Very similar. And what about this move? Again, this will be very similar. This will not favor black because white gets to cut off this stone. This will also be similar, right? This will also be a fight like this. What about this? Right. Now this way, white of course will flatly take this again, and number 2 is a little too far compared with number 2 here. But I think either is okay, right? You might say the one space pincer is a little too close, and number 2, but it's not threatening the eye space, right? So that's why I think this is probably not a great idea for black. I think white's shape is actually pretty good, especially after number 15 here, right? You're forcing black to connect on the inside. So once again, that is why black should consider this counterattack. And we'll get back to the variation we saw earlier again, right? Just it's worth remembering this sequence. It is pretty useful, especially when you have to maneuver as either black or white in this situation, right? Number 3 is worth remembering. Number 4 is worth remembering. And all this sequence is worth studying, I think. So again, you have to play the Atari in the right direction. Another complication is that in this situation, white can play on the outside like this, and black will cut. What happens is that white has 4 liberties, these 3 stones, and if black cannot capture these 2 white stones on the ladder, right? This is when white plays this move. Now white can capture black this way, while seemingly still connected with number 1, right? This will be pretty good because black's wall, right? It doesn't really have a wall, still owes a move, right? You still need another move to kill these 2 white stones. But the thing is that black can play this bend and this standing down, right? Now black has 3 liberties, White cannot capture from this side, cannot capture from the corner, right? You're short. So you can only stand down here. The problem is that black can actually push here, right? And if white blocks, now black can cut. And all of a sudden, white cannot come in. So white must capture number 22. And this will allow black to capture these 3 stones instead, right? But white does get to live. And black can even stand down here to deny white's right to having 2 eyes immediately, right? White can actually stand down here, black plays here. Might be something like this, right? And I think this is slightly better for black, actually, in this situation, right? Because white is not fully alive, and the corner territory is pretty big, and black is pretty solid, right? But it is a variation that exists, pretty complicated. Make sure you understand what's going on with the race to capture here, and this push and cut, right? So of course, after this push, white can also just capture black on the inside, but black will get to have a nice wall on the outside, something like this. So this is a more complicated variation, of course. We go back to what we saw earlier, it also exists, right? One thing to note is that some of these other moves does not work, right? Because black can cut this way. Of course, if black can capture white on a ladder, it will do it. It will do just that. Even if it cannot, I mean, worst case scenario, black will just go back to what we saw earlier, something like this, right? If it cannot play. But it's better for white to deny black that option by connecting here first. And once again, we'll go back to this. Is this still slightly better for white? Maybe, but compare this with the 1-space pincer. Again, the 2-space pincer, when black has a wall on the outside, it's going to be more favorable for black because number 2, the 2-space pincer is more efficient, right, when you're fortifying the wall than a 1-space pincer. So this also exists, and having a 2-space pincer is better than having a 1-space pincer for black. So I think these are all the variations I wanted to show you today. Pretty complicated. I'm glad we got to cover this attachment move, which we didn't get to cover earlier. And this is a pretty interesting move, I think, and a pretty useful move to learn. And it's also interesting to learn, right, some of these follow-ups and how to respond, especially this sequence. Once again, it's worth reviewing, worth repeating a few times so you're familiar with this shape. Of course, most of these variations are playable for both sides, unless otherwise noted. Hope you enjoyed this video. As always, let me know if you have any questions or feedback. Good luck, and thank you for watching.